It is episode 100 of the Brewer Fanatic podcast. And it timed out very well that for this special occasion, we had it's not breaking news, I guess, but news that was broken by a member of the podcast. We have the Brewers extending outfield prospect Luis Lara. We had the Brewers playing baseball on the moon for 3 days and losing that slugfest. But all in all, a pretty successful road trip for them, going 4-2 at altitude on the road, 6 games in 6 days. They got through it. We'll break it down, but we're going to start first with that breaking news that was originally reported by our very own Spencer Michaelis. Spencer, the first one by about, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes, whatever it was. It was a good thing you put it out when you did, because you were like dangerously close to being beaten on this one. But you were the first one to break the Brewers' 7-year extension with outfield prospect Luis Lara. I was playing around on our software, our streaming software, before I started this, so we're going to give you some applause. That's really short. I want that to last longer. But Spencer had it first. Spencer, what can you tell us about the deal? Which, the couple guys came in and kind of clarified the terms a little bit. It's a 7-year, $31 million. Jeff Passan reporting that with the 3 club options on the tail end of it, the deal can max out at 10 years and $79 million. But what can you tell us about maybe what this means for Luis Lara? It seems like maybe not necessarily anything right now, since they optioned him to AAA, and it seems like they're going to let him keep going at their own pace. But you were the first one to have this, your reaction to it, your thought on what this means for player and team, and maybe why you like it or why you don't like it, or just kind of what your feelings might be about this deal for Luis Lara.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say I really appreciate everybody going into the comments of Jeff Passan and John Heyman trying to get me credit. I don't need credit, guys. That was very funny, very entertaining. I enjoyed seeing all of it, but
MLB
clearly,
Trade Rumors was on it. They gave you
yes,
credit for being
yep.
first.
And Adam McKelvey was quick to credit as well. I really appreciate the people who did, but in the
Well,
end, guys,
that's because Adam's an esteemed journalist with some integrity. So
that's a great point. Yeah, that's very true. In the end, like I said, or like you kind of hinted at, like the details were a little different than what I had originally put out anyway. So I really don't care.
first scoop,
But
and you couldn't even get it 100% correct.
I know. It was close. I was told 8 plus 2. It was 7 plus 3. We'll live with it.
We'll
In
blame
the
the
end, though,
source.
yeah. Well, I'm not going to blame the source. No, it was. I will say that was a weird feeling putting that out there, because I was confident in it. But the feeling for those 30 minutes before anyone else reported it, I'm actually very glad it was quick after that, because I was feeling a little uncomfortable. Like, boy, I hope this turns out to be correct, because I was very confident in it, but I'd never done that before. And yeah, it was a weird feeling during that time before anyone else had anything on it. But in terms of the deal, I like the deal for the Brewers, and I think it's very reasonable for Luis Lara as well. I do think this is, in the end, probably one of those deals where if I were to guess the terms, it would have come out to about where it did. We've talked about Lara before on the show. We've gotten questions about Lara. I've talked about him for a couple of years on the Sandbox. He is a very high floor outfielder right now, just based on the defense alone. It is genuinely, in my eyes, I haven't seen a better outfield defender come through the system. And there have been some very, very good outfielders come through the system defensively. Frelick, Mitchell, Churio wasn't ever quite at like that elite level in the minors, but you always have known that there's a ton of potential out there. But Lara has stood out to me from the beginning in the low levels as somebody who just already had the good routes, the good reads. He's improved upon those already. He got even faster than he already was heading into 2025. Like, his sprint speed kind of went up, his time to first, everything just better athleticism on what was already a plus runner. So he has turned himself into a legit, probably 70 grade defender in the outfield. So that gives him a really nice floor to begin with. You're getting that. The bad is what has come along lately, and we've seen a little bit more power. I've said it before. the home run numbers may not be telling the full story as to what he's actually got in the tank in terms of power. I think he probably has earned, in terms of like major league parks, probably 4 of the 7 homers he's hit this year. But it's still more power. He has added more power to the profile. There's a little bit more juice. He's capable of getting to, I think, double-digit homers in the big leagues if things break right and he continues to trend the right way. So in the end, I think it gives you that floor. But like I said, with the bat, I think it raises the ceiling above what we were initially seeing from Lara and thinking about Lara. So from the Brewers' perspective, the $31 million guaranteed, it's never going to be a problem for them if maybe the bat doesn't work out and he just ends up being a very, very good defender, good base runner, say an outfield version of like David Hamilton. I think they could live with that type of money for that type of production. It wouldn't be good value. They wouldn't feel great about it, but they would be fine with it. It's never going to hurt them. But if the bat does play at the big league level and you get more power out of him, I think they still think there's going to be more power coming down the line for him. I think they still believe the bat has room to grow in terms of some of the angles, which have actually been improving as the season went on. He's been lifting the ball more consistently, more line drives. Early in the season, it was heavy ground ball, and the production was there, but I was pretty skeptical of it. Since May started, though, there's been a lot more positive launch angles, a lot more in like that sweet spot where you want the launch angles to be in terms of the most common hits, the most common extra base hits. All of that's been trending well for Lara. So he's a hard worker. He's a guy who brings that high floor because of the defense, and then the ceiling is raised because of the offense. Now, from Lara's perspective, $31 million over basically the team control years. To put it into perspective, like William Contreras is probably going to end up a little bit higher than that at the end of all of his team control. That's going to be about what he earns, probably a little bit more. But that's about what William Contreras, who's been a multi-time All-Star and a very good catcher, is going to earn. Now, inflation plays a role in this, where if William Contreras was going through the system right now, he'd probably earn a little bit more than he would have in these last 6 to 7 years. But for Lara, that's a pretty nice guarantee to have, that I don't have to go through the arbitration process to earn that type of money. I'm guaranteed that type of money over the first 7 years. And then there's escalators, there's incentives where some of the performance can go up even during that time, but mostly on the team options, which is where the Brewers are hoping to gain the value, are in those 3 team options, can potentially extend him beyond the team control for an extra 3 years at what would probably amount to a pretty reasonable amount if he is what they're hoping he turns out to be. So I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. I don't think it's a steal for the Brewers, because I do think there's a world where, like I said, maybe they don't feel at the end of the 7 years that he's really worth picking up those team options. And as I kind of pointed out, that would mean they probably paid him close to what a William Contreras got throughout his whole time of team control. And I don't think that's a steal by any means, but I think it's pretty low risk. So in the end, I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides to have gone this direction. We'll see how it plays out. If the bat does come around to the point where it's better than league average, and he's playing that type of defense in center field and stealing a bunch of bases, it's going to be a very valuable player. That's going to be a guy who you could easily see 4+ win seasons from him. If the bat never comes around, they'll live with what they're paying him, and they'll still have a guy who's probably a version similar to what we've seen of the good version of Blake Perkins throughout most of his career. So I just think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. It wasn't a huge shock that it kind of happened to me. It made a lot of sense as things were progressing through this year that they might want to make Lara one of those next candidates for something like this. But it was still cool to see, and it was definitely cool to see it kind of play out just in like a week's time, where you could kind of feel that it was coming. Like, I think a lot of people were speculating that this might be why he's sitting, and then to see it just play out and to see it happen that quickly and at a, like I said, a reasonable deal for both sides. I think that's good for the Brewers, and it's good for Lara.
You talked about it a lot, so I'm not going to rehash it, but to me, the bat and the power are definitely the big things here. And I mean, you said it too. That's the difference between this deal probably being okay, but not what the Brewers are hoping to get out of it versus the steal being pretty favorable for the Brewers. You're right. It's a very high floor anytime you have a guy who can play very good defense at a premium position. One thought for me is that this feels like it has to kind of cement Jackson Chourio is never going to be a center fielder. I think you could already see the writing on the wall for it, which, again, if you're picking between these two players, like Luis Lara is going to be the vastly superior defensive outfielder just because he's so good at that. But I guess I'm still feeling a little miffed that they just could not have any confidence in Jackson Chourio's ability to play center field. I understand it a little bit based on even a little bit of what you're seeing this year with some of the indecisiveness when he's in a corner spot, but I also feel like he just never quite got enough runway to actually get comfortable in center field either. But I would guess that this has to mean that that probably puts the kibosh on that, barring any major injuries for anybody. And I see you nodding along to that. But the power is going to be the interesting one for me because we've kind of got a growing list now of the Brewers having guys come up through the system who have not really hit for legitimate power in the minor leagues. And it's a little bit of a mixed track record where you have like your big success story in Bryce Terang being a guy who did leverage more of his power eventually. Then you also have Sal Frelick, who, let's be honest, at this point is never going to leverage any power he had. What he did last year was kind of a fluky way to get into it where he was, he was pulling some balls in the air and he was getting them over the wall, but he wasn't necessarily hitting the ball hard still. You've also got the Tyler Black types who just have not been able to get the baseball off the ground and make their profile a little bit more well-rounded. So the boat that I'm kind of in right now is which direction is he going to take? And granted, he's younger than Sal Frelick and Tyler Black were, and he's already accomplished more and shown more in the minor leagues, I think. And there's a little bit more maybe from that standpoint to just be like, hey, he's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. He's 21 years old. I mean, we saw how much stronger Terang got. We saw how much stronger Jacob Mizorowski has gotten, and maybe he follows in that trend. But right now, I'm just really curious to see, is he going to follow a little bit more of that Bryce Terang path with how he develops as a hitter, or is he going to develop into more of that Sal Frelick path or that Tyler Black path? You can tell me if I'm off with the comp here, but like Frelick is just kind of what I see a lot of here with how the profile looks a little bit between like the contact quality and, he's got a really, really good K to walk in Nashville right now, but the zone swing and the chase rates, neither one of them are amazing. They're more both okay. But you can see how the profile works. And again, like he's a better defender than Sal was. There's some pretty good speed here as well. But that's just kind of where I'm sitting. Like I'm wondering, is it going to take more of that successful direction, or is it going to go? I guess Frelick is just kind of the comp that I come back to. Is it going to go more of that direction where, he's good defender, and again, it helps that he's going to play center. Sal has been a corner outfielder, but is it going to go more of that direction where it's a glove first profile? He just never really hits for a whole lot of sustainable power. Even the on base is more okay than good, and he's kind of more of that 85, maybe 90 OPS plus player with good defense. That's a very valuable player. That's probably a 3-win player most years if he's a really good center fielder, maybe even better. But I would imagine by inking him to this deal, like they're kind of hoping there's a little more in there too. So to me, that's kind of what a little bit of it comes down to, just in terms of, is this going to be an okay deal or is this going to be, a really good deal for the team?
Yeah, I think that's all very fair and pretty accurate. I think having kind of followed all the way through the minors, like the plate discipline has been trending up basically every step of the way, which is good to see. The walks have been going up every year, as you noted. Some of that's probably more related to minor league pitchers just not throwing enough strikes. But I do think that he's really stepped up over the course of his career in not taking like those early swings at the iffy 0-0 pitches on the corners and just kind of rolling over, doing things like that. Like I think the zone swing isn't great, and I think he could be a little bit more aggressive on pitches that he could hit early in counts, but I also think at one point he was far too far the other direction, and he was pretty aggressive early in counts and getting himself in trouble and really not seeing results because of that. I'd prefer it this way if I have to choose between the two. Obviously, in a perfect world, he'll find a happy medium, and that will really help things just, take off in the right direction. In terms of the power is very much there from the right side right now against lefties. That type of power is actually probably in line with it's a higher level of power than what Sal Frelick was showing, especially at that age. And as you pointed out with Black and Frelick, like when they were Lara's age, they were in college. That was when the Brewers were drafting them. So the fact that he's already in AAA, showing a lot of this, still has room to grow into some more strength. I do think there's going to be more power coming down the line. I think at one point, I think last year I may have even said like the floor is the Blake Perkins type for a guy like Lara. And then the ceiling is more in line with like a switch hitting version of the type of production you got from Frelick last year. And I think that's still kind of where I would look at it, not necessarily how Frelick got to that production, because we kind of knew that wasn't going to be sustainable, but the overall production being more in line with that, I think that is what he's capable of getting to and doing regularly. So like I said, kind of double digit homers. I don't think he's ever going to grow into the Terang type power, because very few make that type of leap. And he's a small guy, like he's 5'7". So the odds of him having huge power at any point are probably not super high, but I do think you're going to see enough power to keep pitchers honest, to keep them from just being able to lay in fastballs and kind of say, hey, beat me. But it'll be an interesting part of the equation for sure. I'm with you. Like that is going to kind of make or break whether it's they play out the 7 years and probably don't pick up a team option, or they feel great after the 7 years and they say, yeah, we want to pick up this option, and we might end up picking up all three of them. So that's where we'll have to see where it lands. I do agree on the Churio part of things too. It's unfortunate he's probably not ever going to get that chance. At the same time, if he's going to bring a lot of value by just being a solid left fielder who hits really well, and then you have elite defense in center field, like that's good for the Brewers. So you can't really argue too much with it. It's just unfortunate because it does limit Churio's like his value in terms of like WAR and those types of things are going to be limited a little bit by him being stuck in a corner. But for the Brewers, it's kind of the same difference as long as Lara does hit well enough to handle center at a high level, at the big league level. So I keep coming back to like I think it's going to be there. I think 100 to 110 WRC plus is probably where I think most seasons wind up being for him. If once he settles in, probably not right away, but once he settles in, once he does get a little bit more strength on the frame, I think he's capable of being that type of guy, doing it at potentially the top of the order, or maybe even being like a very really good second leadoff hitter, or whatever you want to call it, at the bottom of the order. But the rest of the value that he brings on the field is obviously going to be a huge part of it. The bat is what makes or breaks good, okay, or great contract.
You talked about that he's got more legitimate power from the right side. The Ginger asked on Twitter, am I going crazy, or did prospect lists say that Lara's lefty swing was better than his right-handed swing last year? Double A stats also bore that out. Did something change?
So in terms of the swing, yes, something did change, and the righty swing is in a better place this year. Now, we don't have any StatCast data on it, but just watching it, you can see that there's a more fluid-looking swing from the right side than we had seen in the past for him. That said, the power has always been from the right side. I don't have it in front of me, and it's harder to look at minor league splits, but I know his first two professional homers were righty. I know that he hit at least 2 of his 3 last year righty. So, like, the powers often come from the right side. The fact that he's actually performing in most regards from the right side this year is really encouraging. It's good to see that he is starting to kind of round out that profile. The left side is more where you get it's a line drive, ground ball approach. He's trying to hit the ball up the middle. He's trying to put the ball in play. He does it in a different way than Frelick. I'd imagine the bat speed and stuff is going to look quite a bit different than what we see from Frelick, and I think the bat path is probably going to look quite a bit different than what we see from Frelick, but that's where he's a little bit more like Frelick is from that left side right now. Now, he has shown some pop from that side this year. It's not a ton still. A lot of the best exit velos are from the right side. but I do think he's capable of it. I know that last year there were a couple 108s popped from the left side in Biloxi. And that was as a 20-year-old who was 5'7" and probably weighing 170. So there's more in there. I think you might see a higher average from the left side. That wouldn't shock me. But I would guess in the end that the OPS ends up playing better from the right side, especially with some of the changes to that right-handed swing. So I would say, yes, some things have changed, but the power part of the equation has remained the same. It's always been better from the right side in that regard.
Another question that we got on the extension, Doc asked, how do you think the AAA dynamic is now for prospects with Pratt and Lara getting extensions? What's the determining factor for locking those guys up, but others who are expected to be pieces are not locked up?
It's a good question. My guess, based on how just seeing reactions across like social media and Instagram and everything else, like players are just genuinely happy that their teammates and their friends are getting these extensions. I don't really think it changes too much in AAA. If you think about it, there are former big leaguers in AAA. There are huge top prospects in AAA. There's always a little bit of a different power dynamic between certain players at that level. I don't think it changes anything too much for how everyone operates or how people feel about each other. That would be a surprise to me if it did, especially on a team that's managed by a guy like Rick Sweet in the Brewers organization. Like that just, I can't imagine anything really being an issue or anything like that. If that's kind of how I'm reading into that question, I guess. In terms of the determining factors, though, I think it's just a willingness and an openness for guys that they believe they can gain value out of beyond the team control. So there are going to be guys in AAA that they see as absolute. These guys can be pieces for us. They can be pieces for us next year, this year, whatever. But will they be pieces for us in 8 years? Probably not. And the fact that a guy like Pratt and Lara, both in their low 20s, so you're even 10 years barely breaks into the 30s in age, I think that's a big reason why you see it for them. You see it for a guy like Churio, who was also just turning 20 at the time. I think it's a big reason you'll probably see it for Madej at some point, because I think he will be in the same boat. That's a big part of it. They believe that extending beyond that team control for guys who aren't going to go deep into their, or even into their mid 30s, that's where they're going to get the most value. So I think those are the types you're going to continue to see it for. I don't think you'll see it for the 24, 25-year-olds unless they see something just insane value-wise for the Brewers. But I would imagine most of the extensions that you see are just going to be based mostly on the guys who have moved through the minors quickly. They believe are going to be able to hold value throughout the entirety of the 10 years if they decide to go that route, because most of them are going to be like this and like Cheerios and like Pratt's. They're going to have team options that extend it so they can make the decision on whether they want to continue it. But I don't think it'll ever happen for these guys who are 23, 24, 25. I think the biggest thing is that they're going to be this type of age, talented guys with room to grow, because the Brewers probably believe they'll get more value out of them when they hit their peak versus what they're seeing right now in AAA as well.
One more thought on this deal before we move on. I'm certainly far from the first one to say this, but seeing the length of this thing and where the options are set at really does make me wonder if the Brewers are banking on that next CBA, reducing the number of years of control that you get for a player on his rookie contract. So right now it's at 6 full seasons. After that, you become a free agent. If that gets shrunk down to 5 or maybe 4, then that also changes the dynamic of this contract a little bit, where you're actually adding even more years on compared to what you would have gotten otherwise. So can't help but wonder if that's kind of something that's going on in the back of their minds as well, especially because we've seen them do this before. They did it with Churio, but now 2 in 1 year, it feels almost like they're emphasizing it more now. And again, maybe that's just a coincidence, and a lot of it just does come down to having the right players in the system, having the guys who are willing to do it, the guys where it just makes more sense for a few other reasons. And again, I'm sure that's still the leading reason why they're going for it, but it does kind of add another layer to this where you do start to wonder, are they hedging themselves a little bit, knowing that, hey, starting next year, maybe we're only going to have these guys for, 4 or 5 years instead of 6+, depending on what we do with the service time clock. maybe they're kind of bracing themselves for that and finding a way to get out in front of it a little bit.
Yeah, it would not surprise me at all. If there is a salary cap that does come out of this, there's going to be less team control. That's just how it's going to be. There will not be 6 full years of team control if there is a salary cap, which different discussion, but that's why I don't necessarily think it's going to be as good for the Brewers if it happens as a lot of people seem to think. But we don't need to have that talk. I do think that is absolutely part of it, and who knows? I don't know if there's been at any time where the team control was adjusted at all and how it worked. I don't know if players who had already debuted were grandfathered in. I don't know exactly how that works or how it would work if it happens, where I just can't imagine everybody hits free agency that's had 4 years of team control after everybody thought they were going to be on the team for 6. So I'm sure there'd have to be some sort of cutoff for that. But I do think it's probably playing a role. Yeah, I think there is absolutely part of the equation has to be, can we envision this actually gaining us more team control than if we didn't do something like this? And I think it's absolutely part of it. And it does make me wonder if there might be more out there for the Brewers, if they won't be done doing this, even beyond Made. Maybe there are other players that they do view. And honestly, if they are looking at it through this lens, then I actually could see it going to some of the players who are a little bit older, because if they're looking through it as, well, we might not actually care too much about the team options, but we care about getting them locked in for 7 years instead of the potentially 4 or 5, then I could actually see that, the 23, 24-year-olds that might actually still be in play for the Brewers and some of those guys, because it would make more sense. So depending how heavily they are weighing it, maybe that puts some other guys on the table that I'm not initially considering right now, but it's part of the equation. Almost certainly. I would be shocked if it's not.
As I mentioned before, the Brewers did select Lara's contract, as they're required to after signing him to this deal. Then they optioned him back to AAA to make room on the 40-man roster. Left-hander Brian Fitzpatrick was transferred to the 60-day IL, which is a nice seg into our injury updates. Fitzpatrick was warming up on the mound. He came into the game in Colorado last week, and as he was throwing his warm-up pitches, clearly something happened in that left elbow. He started keeling over in pain, left the game. The word from the Brewers so far has been UCL strain, and right now he's getting more opinions weighing Tommy John surgery as an option there. But one way or another, he is not going to be pitching in games for quite a while here, which is a tough break for him after he showed some things in his first couple of opportunities. But that's the move that the Brewers made to clear that 40-man spot. So now they're down another left-handed option in that bullpen mix in the big leagues. You do have Jared Koenig working his way back. It still doesn't look, to be completely honest, big league ready yet right now, which is maybe what makes this hit a little bit more. But like I said, tough break, not only for the Brewers, but for Brian Fitzpatrick, who was a little bit of a late bloomer and got his opportunity in the big leagues this year, but saw it cut short kind of abruptly there in Colorado.
Yeah, and he had thrown another good inning heading into that. He was heading out for his second inning when he got hurt, and it's very unfortunate. I guess if there's a silver lining for him, it's that now he gets big league pay while he's on the IL. If this had happened in Nashville, it would have changed things quite a bit for him. Now he's on the major league IL. He's accumulating service time. So at least if it was going to happen, it happened at the big league level for him. But having gone through an elbow injury like that, it's not a fun feeling. No matter, there are no real silver linings in the moment, I can tell you that. So hopefully it does end up being something he can rehab. I mean, UCL strain is essentially a partial tear. So it is something that you can rehab it in certain circumstances. Other times you can't. We'll see. It seems like there are some new age ideas coming around on some of the elbow stuff, like we saw with Tarek Skubal. It's not the same situation, but just some of the different things that can be tried. I think there are new things that are coming around. So maybe UCL strains will end up being a better thing than they were in the past. Maybe they'll find something for that. But for now, it's 60 days minimum. And yeah, it would be a surprise to me if we see him again this year, even if everything comes out about as positive as you can get. And that's unfortunate for him. But like I said, at least he got to show what he can do at the big league level. And then when he got hurt, it didn't happen in Nashville because that is more beneficial for him in terms of all the other outside stuff that happens there.
Couple more smaller injury notes. Carlos Rodriguez, he was originally optioned to AAA Nashville several days ago, but that was reversed to a placement on the MLB injured list with right shoulder impingement. So that's another guy who's going to be collecting big league pay while he's up here rehabbing that. DL Hall, who left last week with a pec/scap injury or subscap injury. Pat Murphy said that he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with a left pectoral strain. So his return to play timeline, again, you're looking at missing at least a month and a half here, probably closer to that 2-month range. We'll see how that unfolds for him. The more notable updates that we got in recent days, number one, we'll talk about Brandon Woodruff. The last word on him was he was going to go pitch in the ACL. He did pitch in the ACL through 68 pitches over 3 2/3 innings. We're not going to talk about the results because that, frankly, does not matter at all. But I know I talked last week about how things looked from our vantage point, at least, when he was throwing his live session in Milwaukee before he went out. And I talked about how it seemed like he was going very heavy on the cutters, heavy on the changeups. It seemed like from the few fastballs that I saw that the same life and velo before he hit the IL wasn't there. And I don't mean the 84 to 85, like directly before the IL, but last year and the first couple outings this year where it still was in more of that 92 to 94. Didn't seem like that was quite there on a lot of the fastballs. And I think a lot of what he did in this outing in the ACL kind of lined up with how it seemed to look eye test wise from that live outing. Through a lot of cutters and changeups. He faced a lineup of almost exclusively lefties. It was 4 left-handed hitters and 4 switch hitters. So 8 of the 9 batters that he faced were hitting from the left side, which maybe plays a little bit of a role in it. But either way, he only threw the cutter about 12% to both sides last year, and he was only throwing it like 5% to lefties this year in a couple of starts. So clearly that's a conscious change that he's using that more and that he's trying to get more comfortable with that. And again, using the changeup a lot as well. The 4-seam and the 2-seam both averaged a little bit under 91. So definitely a lot better than what we saw the last time he was on a big league mound 6 weeks ago, but also a tick lower than where he was before that happened and a further tick below where he used to be when he was in his prime. And even last year when he was averaging about 93 on those fastballs. I did look at some of his rehab outings from last year as he was working his way back, and he did have a couple where it did get down to more of that 91, but he also had quite a few rehab outings where it was that 92 to 93 where he sat. So you never quite know if there's going to be a little bit of a further bump when he gets back to pitching in big league games, which it sounds like could come next week. He's going to rejoin the Brewers over the weekend here, and they're going to decide where he's going to pitch next. But you had those changes. Adam McCalvey reported after that live session that he lowered his arm slot a little bit because he's trying to kind of relieve some of the stress on that shoulder and get it working a little more efficiently. He was using that slightly lower slot in this ACL game. The shapes on his fastballs were different too, and you can't quite see it on the data because they don't get that in depth with it, but knowing how this stuff works, like he was cutting the ball more from that lower slot, which maybe shouldn't be shocking given that he dropped down a little bit and he was just throwing a lot of cutters in general. So maybe there's a little bit of carryover there, but the 4-seam fastball was down a couple of inches of vert. It was more in that 15 induced vertical break is where it sat. The 2-seamer and the changeup, because he was cutting them more, they didn't quite have the same amount of horizontal movement as they usually did. So the stuff looks a little different now, and based on some of the pitch grades coming out of that outing, just looking at like stuff models, MLB pitch profiler is the one that I used to kind of pull this data together. They did have that cutter now grading out as the best fastball of the 3, at least these versions of them. If you do get that 4-seamer and the 2-seamer are down to 90 more and maybe touching 92 a couple of times in the outing, and they're both moving a little bit less, I do think you are in a spot now where yeah, it probably does need to be a lot of cutters here, and that might actually be his best bet for kind of changing lanes a little more, getting in on some of those lefty barrels or running away from the righty barrels. And he can get outs doing that, but this is just in my mind kind of further affirmation that he seems to be preparing himself or reacting to the possibility that his stuff just took a further dip from where it was last year. And again, I'm not saying he can't get outs like this, but it probably is going to have to legitimately look a little different now if this is where it ends up. Now, maybe he comes back, and once he's back on the MLB mound, he's used to the slot a little more. He's used to mixing in the cutter more. Maybe the fastball shapes mostly go back to where they had been, and maybe it does get up to more of that 92. And if that is the case, then it probably can look a little bit closer to how it did before this. But, he made a lot of changes last year, but he still got a lot of mileage out of, I'm going to throw 93 right by you down the middle of the plate on that four-seamer. He changed how he used the two-seamer a little bit. He threw it a lot more. He kind of worked in and out with it and mixed the cutter in there. But when he threw the four-seamer, it was still very much just, I'm coming right at you, right down the middle or over the middle of the plate, and guys just weren't hitting it still, and there were a lot of whiffs and a lot of swings underneath it. If he tries to do that now with 90 down 2 inches of vert, it's probably not going to work quite as well. And again, it kind of seems like he's maybe in a spot where he and the Brewers are preparing for that reality of maybe it just doesn't even come back to that point. And if I do need to pitch with 90 and not quite the same stuff, like down another level from where it was last year, I'm going to have to change even more things. So it's going to be interesting to see where that next outing is, because that especially if it's in the big leagues, we're really going to get a good look at what kind of pitcher he actually is going to have to be moving forward, because I think he's kind of facing a little bit of another crossroads here, a second season in a row.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be trending that way. I just, with what we talked about last year with Brandon Woodruff, I think he will find a way to give himself solid production kind of with whatever he's got. But it is going to be more difficult if he can't throw the fastball like he's always thrown the fastball. And even though the fastball was down a few ticks from what we were used to seeing last year, as you mentioned, he didn't really change how he threw the fastball. It was basically the exact same type of attack mode, throw it right at guys and see what they do with it. And for the most part, they just can't square it up. The current version of it will probably get squared up more often. So yeah, he probably will have to go to the cutter more, unless the shape reverts back to what we were seeing early in the season and last year. I keep coming back to, I just kind of believe Woodruff is going to find a way to get it done. It might not be pretty. It might not be the same level of strikeout or swing and miss that we've been very accustomed to over the course of his career. And even when he returned last year, to a bit to our surprise even. But I think he'll find a way to get it done. It just might not be as pretty. It might not be a scenario where you're seeing him go as deep into games, because he has to be a little more careful with his stuff. He needs to maybe try and be, I don't want to comp him to Jose Quintana because that feels disrespectful to Brandon Woodruff, but it might have to be a little bit closer to that type of plan of attack where it's like, hey, I might walk a few more guys, but I need to be able to stay off barrels. I need to stay further on the corners and work more in that regard rather than just going right at guys with my fastball. So we'll see how it plays out. Like you said, it's possible that he gets on a big league mound, he gets comfortable with the arm slot, and my guess is we'll see a little bit of a drop in the induced vertical break no matter what, just with the arm slot dropping. But maybe it's a lot closer to what it was before, and it still works at a decent level. We'll just have to find out in that regard. But I do have a pretty high level of confidence that it'll be solid. It'll be fine big league pitching. It just might not be what we are hoping for or we're used to seeing from Woodruff in the past.
I know we said it a lot last year. Shoulder injuries are
not
a joke.
No.
I know we took a little bit of heat when we said like 80 innings kind of felt like the reasonable expectation for him last year. Did he even reach that last year?
It had to have been really close. It couldn't have been much more if it was.
I'm going to check again really quickly, but the bottom line is that they didn't get a ton out of him last year. He was really good when he was on the mound. Yeah, 64 big league innings last year for him. So he fell short of even what we were saying last year. And again, the way the production worked and the strikeouts and all that was well above what I was expecting. Even if like the velo kind of was where I thought it could end up in more of that 92 range, but here we are, we're another year later, and the shoulder is very clearly still having some pretty major impacts on how often he's able to get on the mound and how it looks when he's on the mound. And again, that just kind of goes to show that like you really do need to make the expectations very reasonable, no matter who the guy is, when he's dealing with something like this. But it also does kind of raise the question of, we didn't really ask a lot of questions when the Brewers extended that qualifying offer because they kept saying they felt really good about the shoulder. When you don't have any other information to go off of and knowing how stingy they can be sometimes, I think, we both assumed they're probably right on this. He's probably going to be able to give them some pretty good volume. That has not been the case. So I do think it's time to start asking the question of what were they looking at to think that the guy who had major shoulder surgery through 60 innings coming off of that, had the lat injury at the end of the year. What did they see that made them feel like a $20+ million commitment was going to make sense here? And again, there's the whole, veteran aspect in the clubhouse, and maybe that plays into it a little bit as well. But the reality is it's trending in a direction where they're paying $20 million to a guy who is probably going to end up missing about half a season's worth of starts or close to that. And they're not, even if he's effective when he's on the mound, they're not going to get a ton of volume at this rate. And depending on how the stuff looks, there might be a further dip from where it was last year. It's just not, if the intention was to give him that money because they had a baseline expectation of here's what we're going to get out of him, that's not looking very good right now. If there were other reasons for it, fine. But I do think it is time to start asking some questions here about what were they looking at? Is this what they thought was going to happen? Because this hasn't really been that unpredictable.
No, I mean, I would be pretty confident in saying that this is not what they were expecting. I don't think. And as you said, I think there was probably a fair or reasonable expectation that this could very well be what happened. I think they do value him a lot as a person, as a leader. I think that is absolutely part of why they, even if they thought the risk was a lot lower than other people thought, they knew there was a decent amount of risk here. Like there's just, I can't see any chance they didn't see what you just laid out as being a risk in investing $20 million, the most they've ever given a pitcher for a year. But I think they did feel like no matter what happens, they'll have the fallback of, he can help out Jacob Mizorowski. He can help out, Kyle Harrison wasn't in the plans at the time, but now him and Brandon Sproat, another guy who wasn't really part of the equation when this whole deal went down.
But maybe still like the Hendersons, the Coleman Crows,
exactly.
Robert Gasser, that whole line of guys.
Right. So all the young arms that were going to be the starting rotation until Sproat and Harrison came around, like it was still going to be a bunch of young arms, no matter who you slotted in there. So I think they felt that was going to be something that brought a lot of value. And I would imagine they didn't think it was worth 20 million. And if they don't get enough out of him, they'll probably feel like it wasn't a great deal. But in the end, I would question for 1 year, like, where is that 20 million really going to go for the Brewers? Maybe you could argue Eugenio Suarez signs a deal or something for a year and 20 million. But in the end, they'll probably feel fine because they're going to feel like they got a lot of non-pitching value out of Brandon Woodruff and having him around and having him. I mean, even the initial contract to bring him back when he was getting this shoulder surgery was pretty healthy. Like that was a lot of money to give a guy who they had no idea what they were going to get. I do know that the organization views him as like a special guy that they really, really like having around, and they're probably willing to pay a premium for that. I would still bet they're not thrilled if they don't get much more out of him on the mound, though.
More notes on a rehabbing starter who's been down long-term, Quinn Priester. So the Brewers report from his last rehab assignment was that he did not report any pain, and he was going to pitch 5 ups and 70 to 75 pitches on Saturday, again in the ACL. But this is another outing where he was just nowhere near the strike zone and spraying the baseball all over the place. So they've reversed course a little bit in the couple days since. They've now pulled his rehab assignment for a second time. And, we don't need to go through the whole thing again. I just still want to know, and we'll get more details over the weekend, I'm sure. But what is the status of that nerve? Is that nerve compressed? Is the compression gone? And they're trying to figure out why things are not coming back. But it's hard to look at these continued results and say that he can feel the baseball or that he's feeling the baseball better in his hand. And, Pat Murphy did make it sound like after the previous outing that he took a step forward. Clearly things were not firing well in this last outing, and now they're pulling him off the rehab again. So again, not a whole lot to say. We've talked about it plenty and about how this is usually something that tends to require surgery. And, we're getting into mid-June here, and he's clearly still not at a point where he looks like he's particularly close to being able to pitch in big league games. So maybe this is finally the crossroads. I don't know. We'll find out here in a couple days, hopefully.
Yeah, I think at this point we'll just find out what Murph says and what the Brewers say on it. But I am curious. I don't know what the rules are, but how many times can you pull a guy off of rehab assignment without extending? I feel like at some point you have to extend the actual IL stint or something, because otherwise teams could kind of just play that game, I feel like. So I don't know if it restarts a clock at some point, or I don't know how that works, but I'd be curious on that. It's not super important because in my eyes, I don't think there's going to be a window that ends up with him pitching this season at this point. So whatever it takes, whether it is just rehab, whether it's just working through it, finding feel for the ball, or it's surgery, I hope they can kind of make a full-blown decision on it soon and dive into it and just honestly aim for 2027, because I think that's the next time he's going to be able to help the Brewers.
One more transactional update that we'll revisit a little bit later in the show. Joe Kuhnel's here. The Brewers acquired him from the Athletics after the A's DFA'd him. As a reminder, he was here for a couple of different stints in 2024, but never appeared for the Brewers. He's back. He did pitch twice in Las Vegas, and we'll have some stuff to go over there. Drew Rom is here as well. He joined the big league team when they needed some more arms to help fill some innings out of the bullpen with some of those injuries that occurred last week. Craig Yoho was here for a couple of days, and I thought threw the ball fine, but he's back in Nashville now. I'm sure Spencer has some thoughts on that when we get there. But we'll check off some of those topics as we go through the week that was. We'll start with the Brewers in Colorado, where they swept the Rockies in a 3-game series. A lot of offense here. The Brewers did their part keeping up with that run environment. We'll start with game one, winning this one 9-7 in extras. Brandon Sproat got the ball in this one and was not great, but okay. Kind of settled down once he got toward the tail end of this game. 5 innings for him. 7 hits, 3 earned runs, couple of walks, 2 strikeouts, a homer, and a wild pitch. Like I said, Craig Yoho, he threw 2 scoreless. He did walk 3. This was probably the iffier of his 2 outings.
Mm-hmm.
He did give them some length and gave them some outs, but probably would have had a better team take advantage of him a little bit more than the Rockies did in this one. The control is always the big thing for him, and being able to make enough competitive pitches at the big league level. The Brewers came back to take the lead with a 4-run 9th inning. Jake Bauers, Sal Frelick, and Andrew Vaughn delivered some big hits in that frame, punching some ground balls into some timely spots. However, the Rockies came back in the bottom of the 9th against Trevor McGill. I think he was fine in this outing. I'm not particularly worried about anything that I saw here. It started with Jake Bauers going for a ground ball toward Bryce Terang that he probably should not have gone toward. Nobody's covering the base in time. That's a leadoff base hit on a ground ball, which changes the complexion of that inning pretty dramatically to have the leadoff guy on with nobody out. Then a few more hits against McGill. Only one of them was really hit hard. And I also was not a huge fan of the pitch call on the Hunter Goodman sac fly. So McGill got ahead 0-2, and strike 2 was a fastball at the bottom of the zone that was called a ball but challenged by Gary Sanchez back into being a strike. To me, just knowing that you got that call, it feels like your tunnel is now set up at the bottom and you can get a chase on a curveball if you go there. They went back to the fastball. Goodman didn't hit it, to be clear, but he was able to put it in play and he was able to lift it in the air for a sac fly. So just kind of knowing the situation there, I wonder if maybe you could have gone curveball there and gotten your swing and a miss or gotten your ground ball instead. But didn't end up mattering a whole lot because Jake Bauers doubled in the 10th to retake the lead. Garrett Mitchell and Frelick again adding on as the Brewers would go on to win this one. Spencer, do you have anything you'd like to add on this one before we move into game 2 here and the rest of the series?
Just on the Gary pitch call, I think, like you said, that's a situation where chasing a strikeout makes a lot of sense because you've got a guy on third, it's the game-tying run, and you've got an 0-2 count. It's just hard to even come up with a good reason to go fastball there in my mind. Like, go for the chase and then, quite frankly, go for the chase again on 1-2 if he doesn't go after it. And then you can make the argument, maybe we have to go back on the attack. We don't want to put the go-ahead winning run on base. But I would say in that spot, you've got 2 opportunities to try and really chase a strikeout, and it's hard to understand why they didn't in that spot. But as you mentioned, didn't end up hurting them.
Game 2, a more comfortable win for the Brewers, 7-1. Jacob Misiorowski pitching in Coors Field for the first time in his career, 7 innings, only 4 hits allowed, an unearned run, 3 walks, and 8 Ks. Not affected a whole lot by the altitude. And we don't need to keep talking about Miz, but really the note from this one is that he was going to be pulled in that 7th inning midway through the inning, looked at the dugout, said that he wanted to finish that inning. They let him, and he responded with a couple of strikeouts to take this one home and complete 7 innings. That's definitely something you want to see from a pitcher. You want to see a guy who feels like, I can do it. This is my situation. I'm in control. I still like how I'm feeling. I want the ball. But I also think there's a distinction that needs to be made here. Like, this is not quite the same thing as some pitchers who are always going to tell you that, because there are a lot of times where a pitcher will want to finish the inning and they're not going to let him because they know that there are better options out there. And these guys, a lot of these guys are competitive as hell. They want to keep the ball even if they're not feeling great. And I think there are a lot of pitchers in that moment who will, no matter how they're actually feeling, they're not always being honest with themselves about what's actually the best option here for me, what's the best option for the team. They're not being selfish, they're just being competitive, and that's in their nature. But in Misiorowski's case, I think what probably helped the decision to leave him in was that he has had outings where, oh, it's the cramps, or nope, my legs are starting to go, and he realizes that. And there were times where they would talk to him and he would say, I don't think it's a good idea for me to go back out there. I think this needs to be it. And I think when you have a kid who has been honest with you about how he's feeling when it's not feeling great, that makes it a lot easier to really take him at his word when he's out there and he's yelling at you, no, I'm good, I have this. Because he's shown you that he's got a gauge for when it's not there and it's not the day to push it. So if he understands what that feels like and he's told you that, then the days where he's on the mound and he's saying, no, I'm still good, my stuff is still good, I can finish this. Those are the moments where I'm going to be, okay, I believe him, because he knows what it feels like when it's not that. And if he clearly is feeling different this time, I'm going to take him at his word, and I'm not just going to assume that it's adrenaline or it's, competitive fight or whatever it is. Like, I know that he's actually feeling good enough to get this done, and that he doesn't think that, he's run out of bullets or anything, and he still thinks that he's the best guy to stay out there. So I think that's something that's really, really important to note in a situation like this. And again, I think partially explains why this is the moment where they said, okay, it's on you. And they didn't really question him a whole lot once he started yelling toward the dugout like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we've seen that coaching. The guys who will tell us, no, I'm good. And then, okay, we'll put him back out there for another inning. And all of a sudden the velo's way down and they weren't good, but they really wanted to finish their outing strong. They wanted to go deeper. And it's not, again, like you said, it's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from a place where they're very competitive in their mind, as should be the case with every pitcher. Nobody else should have the ball. Like, it should be my ball. So, like, you understand that, but as a coach, it's your job to decipher whether that's true or whether it's not. Being honest with them in times where you're not ready is making it a lot easier for them to decipher that when you tell them you are good to go. So it doesn't hurt that he was touching triple digits numerous times that inning either, where they're probably saying, okay, yeah, I mean, he probably is fine still, and proceeded to hit 101 a couple times in those next two batters, and it went really heavy on the cutter. But it was cool to see. I mean, it's a good sign of growth for Miz that he has been able to decipher for himself when it's time to go and when he's got more in the tank. And I think back to the Cardinals start a couple times ago where he knew it was his last batter basically, and he brought like 103 multiple times to Mason Wynn, and he fouled off a couple, and Miz was kind of laughing like, man, I don't have too much more in here. But then he breaks off a curveball, ends the inning. His start is done. He knew that it was his last batter, and he was at the end of his rope, and that he was just going to empty the tank, and then he was going to be done. I think those, again, we've talked a lot about a lot of different signs of growth for him, but it's just, that's what's so impressive is that all of this just came together this quickly. It's just, it's truly mind blowing. And I think everything you said is spot on, though. Like, honesty goes a very long way when you do want to maintain, like, I'm good, I am ready to go. If they can trust you, they'll probably do it. And again, doesn't help to be Jacob Mizorowski versus the 5-starter trying to plead his case. Like, that also is going to play a role. But I think you're right that it matters that he's been willing to tell them when he's not good to go, and that makes it easier for them to believe him when he says he is.
On the offensive side, the Brewers did what you should do in Coors Field, get the ball in the air. They hit 5 home runs in this game, including 2 by Bryce Terang. One of the rare instances where the Brewers were doing their scoring via the long ball, and it worked out well for them in this one. Game 3, the Brewers would add on to their scoring. 12-4 would be the final in this one. Shane Drowan, the next Brewers' first full season starter, to get his first outing in Coors Field, and he wasn't as dominant as Jacob Mizorowski. It's hard to do that, but he answered the call. 6 1/3 for him, 5 hits, 3 earned runs in 6+ innings. That is a very, very good Coors Field start. 1 walk, struck out 4, managed the contact pretty well. We've seen, some of the other pitches that he's added into the mix, and he got a little bit more mileage out of the 2-seamer in this one. He was mixing pitches a little bit. I do like that they've kind of gone away from the cutter these last 2 starts, because I think his cutter kind of stinks, and it backs up on him a lot. And that was something that I did talk to Chris Hook about. I wrote about Drowan leading into this start, just about why they've added some of the pitches that they have, what they think he can be when it really starts coming together. Really, the big thing they focused on for him was everything about his mechanics and what he was throwing. He was able to kind of play that north-south game, going up and down, but he was pretty limited to pitching to the glove side. They wanted him using both sides of the plate. They felt that he could execute better too if he got more accustomed to driving through that arm side and locating pitches over there. So 2-seamer gives him the ability to do that. They're working on that newer changeup still, because he's got to kind of try to get a feel for that after surgery. They like the cutter. They think it can be a really big part of what he's doing. But again, I'm kind of happy to see him go away from that for now, because I do think it probably was his worst pitch outside of that new changeup. So go with what you're good at. I also just really like how that 4-seamer plays for whiffs. I don't think you need to be shy about using it, but I can kind of understand why they're mixing in some of the other pitches that they are.
Yeah, forcing hitters to cover both sides of the plate is extremely important. I mean, I've heard hitters talk about the fact that they want to be able to cut the plate in half. Like, that's at times that's the whole approach, is go up there and I'm looking in or I'm looking out. And if you can pretty much just say I'm looking in, if you're a righty hitter, like, that makes things a lot easier. So I do think there's value in doing that for sure. I just want to also add, like, the 3 earned runs are probably not even indicative of how well he pitched, because that first inning, he gave up an infield hit on a pop-up that got lost in the sun, and then he gave up a blooper into right center that Garrett Mitchell slipped as it took like a weird hop and turned into a double. He could have very easily gotten out of that inning with 0 runs scored. Instead, 2 of the 3 came in that first. So he really pitched well. And the fact that we talked about it a lot, that the way they were using him would kind of help him stay built up a little bit, but still to only in the second start, after moving back into the rotation, be able to go that deep into the game at a place like Coors, like that's impressive stuff. That's a really hard thing to do for anybody, and to do it as you were kind of built up, but not fully built up the last month or month and a half or so. That says a lot about, I think, the type of guy he can be, but he's just kind of a competitor who goes out and gives you everything he has. So it was nice to see. I think at this point, like, he should be making starts, and I don't think there's any question about it.
Yeah, he's a starter, man. He's got a starter's mix. He's got a starter's poise. He's also holding the velo more as a starter than he was before. That also has to do with some of the stuff that they've kind of cleaned up with his body and with his tempo and how he's moving more repeatably. He Even after they get a couple guys back, I think they should still be trying to give him starts. There should be
Agreed.
guys who are in line to lose their spot, I think, before Shane Drowan.
Yep, agreed.
Craig Yoho pitched in this one as well. This, I think, was probably his better outing of the two. He gave up a homer in this one, but 2 more strikeouts, no free bases. Would not matter, though. He went back down to Nashville after this one, as the Brewers did a little bit of reshuffling in that pen. They brought in Joel Kuhnel, as we talked about. We'll talk about him in the Vegas series, but just another kind of cup of coffee for Craig Yoho, and it's getting hard to see him really finding a role with this team, because it seems pretty clear that he's far down on their depth chart of guys who they think are going to be consistently competitive up here. And, Spencer, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, but they're just not really giving him any prolonged opportunities. It's a 40-man spot that you're not getting a whole lot of value out of right now. Would not shock me if he ends up being somebody that they move at the deadline.
No, it wouldn't at all. And it's tough to also say you come up for one series and it's at Coors, and that's kind of the gauge you're going to get. But I think you're right that he came up out of necessity, not because they believed that he was somebody who they wanted to have at the big league level right now. I think they just felt he was the option. Him and Fitzpatrick were kind of the option. Fitzpatrick got hurt, and then they brought in Rom and they brought in Kuhnel, and that's kind of where that roster spot goes. Like, he was always just somebody that they were going to use in that type of role until they could find somebody to replace him. I do have thoughts on it. I think I understand some of the hesitation with Yoho, like the command, while better this year. I think it's legitimately better this year. I think he's throwing more strikes with more of his pitches, especially the changeup. It is a reasonable concern. And the fact that all of his shapes are so big, it's kind of what we talked about with like Crow the other day, where sometimes with that big a shape, it just makes it easier for hitters to kind of sell out for one or the other. Like, you can just kind of, okay, I'm selling out for fastball. He might throw me the changeup, but okay, now I'm selling out for the changeup he throws so often. And it's not quite the same as Devin Williams, who threw it like 83. His is slow enough where hitters can sit on it and still just kind of adjust their swing to get to it too. So it is tough. I like him still. I think there's a big league pitcher in there. I think there's a guy who can help the Brewers, but he doesn't necessarily fit with what they normally like in their pen guys, or really their arms in general. So I'm with you. I think there's a pretty decent chance that he finds himself in a different organization at the deadline. I could see it working out really well for him. I think he could have a long big league career. And I think there are still things that could be tinkered with. Last year, for a week or two in AAA, he broke out more of like a shorter sweeper version of his sweeper that was thrown harder. I really liked that. I was hoping he would stick with that, and he didn't. I could see a team somewhere else kind of having him stick with that or go to that, and it helping a lot. But for now, it just feels like, yeah, he's down the depth chart, and I can understand it to an extent, even if I don't fully agree with it.
The Brewers broke this one open with a 7-run 6th inning. We won't go through the whole thing, but some highlights. Andrew Vaughn tripled, Gary Sanchez homered, and then the Brewers just kind of stringing together a bunch of hits and walks and all kinds of Brewers nonsense after that to just keep the line moving for a comfortable series win on getaway day to head to Vegas, I should say, with the sweep. And oh boy, did they head to Vegas. So couple of notes before we get into this one. For game one, the first bullet point that I have on our notes is that we're not going to go into detail on a whole lot from this game because it's tough to gauge anything that really happened here. So I'm just going to come out and say it right off the bat. It's an embarrassment that Major League Baseball greenlit meaningful MLB games to be played at Las Vegas ballpark. These are big league players playing big league quality baseball. They should be playing these games in big league facilities, and this venue is not remotely close to that. Right away in game one, I mean, you could see it on TV from the camera that the infield was dry and hard, and ground balls were doing all kinds of crazy things. Joey Ortiz had 2 misplays because he had no idea how the ball was going to react, and that's a guy who's about as good as anybody at reacting to the ball and being able to kind of adjust himself on the fly. You had 94-mile-an-hour fly balls or 94-mile-an-hour pop-ups in some cases, going for home runs, batted balls that have never in the history of the StatCast era, so 10-plus seasons, balls that have never in the last 10-plus years been a home run or even been a hit, going for home runs. This was just very hard to watch. It wasn't big league baseball. There's just not a ton to take here. And we did get a question on it, just asking, like, what do you just throw these results out? What do you do here? I would just really love to see the park factors for this ballpark. That's just kind of where I'm at right now, because that's going to be really funny. You could be looking at like a 130 park factor for this place, depending on how these next couple games go, because they're playing 3 more games here at this ballpark, the A's are. So just looking at these final scores, though, 15-14, 7-5. Game 3 did settle down a little bit because the Brewers just did not have good at-bats in the last 2 games here. But this was tough to watch. It wasn't big league baseball. Like I said, there's some people who I think thought that this was fun just to see the offensive explosion and all this stuff. But at some point, the game just becomes so far removed from even the normal laws of physics about how the baseball is supposed to behave based on how you hit it and how you pitch it and how you do all this stuff. Like, it's unfair to the players. It's bad for the product. Like I said, it's embarrassing that meaningful big league games are played here. This should never happen.
Yeah, it was. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's hard to say that a 15-14 game that went extra innings wasn't at least somewhat entertaining. But the fact that they were playing a game in this type of a series in this type of environment, embarrassing is the right word for it. It should not be the case. It shouldn't have happened. It should not be happening again for the A's. Like, Nick Kurtz would probably hit 70 homers if that was their home park throughout the course of a season. Like, that's what we're talking about here. Like, it's just not normal. It's not even remotely close to what it wasn't like Coors even. It was way different than Coors. So it was tough. I mean, it sucks for Kyle Harrison. He was overperforming some of the peripheral stats anyway. This probably put him a little bit more in line with that, but it still sucks that a guy who was having that good of a overall surface level line kind of got crushed by going to a place like this and just having his line balloon overnight. The game really, I wasn't having a ton of fun watching it, and then I felt like, okay, they won here. Jonah Heim popped up to right field, and that ball going out, and that was about the time where I was like, didn't help that it was like 12:30 in the morning already at that point, but that was about the time where I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Like that, as you mentioned, or hinted at least, 0 expected batting average, meaning there has never been a hit on a ball hit with that type of launch angle and exit velocity in the StatCast era, and a homer in 0 out of 30 parks. Unfortunately, the Brewers were playing in park number 31 this year, and it did go out and tie the game in that 10th inning. I'm glad the Brewers won the game. After that game, I pretty much was just fine getting out of there. I was happy they won a game If they would have taken 2 or 3 or swept, it would have been great, but it would have sucked to get swept in a place like that because it just felt like it wasn't real baseball, and that would really that would have a bigger effect on the record than a 1-2 series or whatever it would end up being. But it just wasn't fun to watch it there. And like you said, I think people like homers. I get it. It is fun to see the ball fly, but it's fun to see the ball fly in a legitimate way. It's kind of the same thing as the steroid era is cool to look back on and see highlights from, but in my eyes, I probably wouldn't have loved watching baseball in that era just because of how it was getting done. So this was like park steroids and environment steroids, and the ball was just kind of going out because of that in a lot of cases. It wasn't a ton of fun. We got to see some cool things. We'll talk about, Joel Kuhnel all of a sudden throws 100 miles per hour, and we saw some stuff like that. But Brandon Sproat took his best outing of the season at this place. So, there were things to look at in this series that were, at least we can take some stuff away from it, but it is hard to look at it and really not just kind of discount everything that happened, at least offensively.
I can't remember who said it on Twitter, but somebody explaining why this isn't fun. They said, I don't want to watch Steph Curry shoot into a giant garbage can, which I thought was a very good way of putting it. Like,
I like that.
It waters down the talent.
Yeah.
You can't really appreciate the talent because these guys don't have to actually do anything nearly as impressive to have impressive results. So it waters down the entire experience for everyone. And I think that's kind of what the issue is here. But like you said, Jonah Heim, his game-tying homer off Aaron Ashby that had a 0 expected batting average and was a home run in 0 of 30 parks. And again, 0 expected batting average. I think people look at the X and they assume that this is just kind of calculated out of thin air and that there's a whole bunch of probabilities and stuff that go into it. No, it just means that a ball hit, what was it, hit like 94 miles an hour with like a 48. So like almost a straight up pop-up. That wasn't even hard hit. In the last 10 seasons of all the Major League Baseball games, that has never once been a hit. It has been caught every single time because it's a pop-up.
Yeah.
But that was a home run for the first time in recorded history since we've tracked that kind of stuff. So a couple more notes on that front. There were 3 home runs in this game with an expected batting average under 400. And 5 with an expected batting average under 600. So at that point, you're also looking at like over half of these home runs where in a normal environment, it's a coin flip whether that ball is even a hit or not. Just an insane offensive environment. So again, like we said, it's not really worth breaking a whole lot down from game 1, especially 15-14. The Brewers did come back to win. Okay. Joel Kuhnel probably was the most exciting part of this for the pitching nerds, coming out and throwing 100. He would do it again in his next outing the following night too. So he averaged 94 on his sinker with the Athletics. In this first game, he sat over 99. He touched triple digits multiple times. He came out the next night and threw 20 more pitches and averaged almost 99, just under it. I am curious to see how it looks when he gets out of this ballpark, because knowing just how crazy the ball behaved here, also knowing that StatCast took a dump for 3 innings in the third game of the series and just did not work. I'm also just kind of curious because it seemed like a couple of higher slot guys were reading warmer, because Ashby was also, and again, maybe it is just like they were playing in heat and humidity and all this stuff here, so maybe that played a role too. But I noticed that there were a lot of guys who were the same, and then Kuhnel and Ashby, and there was someone for the A's too who was a higher slot guy, and they were all kind of up a tick or two. Now, Kuhnel was up almost 5 ticks, so there's probably something going on here beyond that as well, but something clearly changed here. I'm just curious, like, what changed and to what extent, and I think we'll get a better idea of that once we get out of this weird dystopian Twilight Zone ballpark. But Spencer, I know you liked his stuff when he was throwing 94. Even if he's actually going to sit 96 or something now instead of 99, like it does get interesting, because I don't know if I'd say it's a great sinker shape. I think if he throws 100, though, I think this might be a better sinker than Abner Uribe's. like shape-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not, and like Abner's raw shape isn't great. We've talked about how it seems like the movement's kind of late on it, so maybe that plays a role. But just numerically, the shape of this one I think is a little better. And if the velo's up there, like you're looking at a pretty good pitch. But I'm also curious about the whiff pitches. Like he gets a lot of whiff with cutters and sliders, and so he throws 3 secondary glove side pitches that basically all move about the same, but they're each like 4 miles an hour apart from one another. So it's like it's the same spin kind of movement, but he's taking like different levels of velo off of it from the grip and from how he's spinning it. So it's an interesting profile. If the velo's up, it gets even more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if the velo is up, like you said, 96, 97 even, I think he moves into probably one of your most interesting relievers, not necessarily top of the line relievers in that pen, but like he moves ahead of some guys pretty quickly. And as a guy they just picked up for cash from the A's of all places, that's pretty interesting. That's like you mentioned, it's 3 different breaking balls to the glove side that all aren't that different, except for somehow he throws them all with different varying levels of speed. And they all looked like they were pretty uncomfortable against it. The A's did in the 2 outings. Couple home runs in the 2 outings that he had. I'm not worried about that. The stuff that he was showing will play. He threw some changeups prior to coming to the Brewers. I don't think he threw any in these first 2 outings against any of the lefties, but like it's a pretty deep pitch mix for a guy coming out of the bullpen. And if the velo's up, which we should point out, this was still his highest velo he'd ever had. But I did see some people mentioning like he did used to get up into like that 98 range with the Reds. And then when he left the Reds organization, it kind of went away for a while. So he has shown at least decent velo above what he was showing this year in the past at times. So we'll see. But if it's there, I think he's a guy that I would not be surprised if he pretty quickly works his way into kind of some leverage outings. I think he's capable of doing that.
I said kind of jokingly to someone as he was pitching. I say kind of jokingly because it's that there's a little bit of seriousness to him. To this, I said if he's throwing 100, he might be their second or third best reliever. Like he might be right behind Aaron Ashby and then maybe McGill and Abner, but I would actually probably put him closer to like equal ground with those guys with where their stuff is at. But yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see kind of how it looks when he gets back to Milwaukee. And again, the Brewers will be home this weekend, which means opportunities to maybe talk to some people about what's going on with Joel Kuhnel. But we should recap the rest of the series here briefly. We'll talk a little bit more about the next 2 games because they were not as outrageous. The Brewers dropping the final 2 games in Vegas, 7-5 to the A's in Game 2, 4-3 in Game 3. Robert Gasser got the ball in Game 2, and again, you look at this outing and it doesn't look good in the box score. He gave up 4 homers, but 2 of those homers had expected batting averages under 250, so should have been outs instead of home runs because they weren't hit very hard. He had a 26% whiff rate, the high 4-seamer, which has had a better shape this year, and an elite vertical approach angle. Got a lot of whiff on it again, 26% whiff overall, 25% hard hit, 88.4 was the average exit velo against him. He did walk 2. And the homer that he gave up to Kurtz, that was pretty bad pitching just in general because he got ahead 0-2, made 2 straight horrific 2-strike pitches, and ended up giving up the home run when he left one over the plate. So that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. But I think for the most part, his stuff played very well in this one. He was competitive enough, and I think he got Vegas'd in this one more than anything. So that's 2 straight starts now where I think he's trended in the right direction, and he's looked a lot more like a guy who can help them and can be competitive, which again was not the case as recently as like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it looks a lot more like what we were hoping to see, honestly, even when he first debuted, which was using that 4-seam to actually get swing and miss rather than leaning super, super heavily on the sinker. And it was working in 2024, but it didn't feel very sustainable unless he started to use the four seam, and then those first two starts this year were just, I mean, they were bad. They were playing bad. There wasn't much good to take away from them. These last two have been much more in line. Like you said, it's a 6 earned runs over 5 innings line. It doesn't feel like it if you're just looking at it that way, but this looked a lot more, again, like a guy who can get outs as a starter for the Brewers at the big league level. And that's important. That's really important, especially given what they're going through with the injuries and everything else. Like, having that available to you is really big. I don't want to sidetrack, but I just thought of this with you mentioning Kurtz. He had a couple cheaper home runs in this series. That homer he hit off Ashby was like the most impressive. Lefty 99 up and in to turn it around like he did. That was one of the most insane swings I've ever seen from a lefty. That was incredible. So he's an awesome hitter. He was one of my favorite dudes to watching that series. Like, I've already seen him a decent amount and knew enough about him, but holy, that dude can hit. But yeah, Gasser, I mean, just, this is more in line with what we're hoping for. The results will look better when he gets out of, playing on the moon.
You mentioned Brandon Sproat in Game 3, somehow delivering one of his best starts of the year at Vegas Ballpark. 6 innings for him, 4 hits, an earned run, only walked 1, struck out only 3, but he was managing the contact better, just the 1 home run, keeping the ball on the ground a little bit more. Couldn't tell you exactly what he was throwing because StatCast, like I said, just shut down for 3 innings. So about almost half of his pitches didn't even get tracked. But definitely better stuff for him, definitely more competitive. So something for him to build on there. Had a couple moments too where he got into some spots that have given him trouble before, where some traffic and things maybe potential to snowball a little bit, and he was able to work through it and make pitches, which is a big sign for him. Things went south when Chad Patrick entered for the 7th inning with a 3-1 lead, and he went home run, single, home run, 3 batters faced, 3 runs in. A's have the lead. He comes out, and the Brewers not able to make good on any opportunities after that. William Contreras pinch hit in the top of the 9th with 2 on, 1 out, down 1, and he hit a negative 27 degree launch angle ground ball double play. The Brewers, a little bit frustrating that just about all you needed to do in this ballpark was hit a decently hit pop-up, and it was going to go out, and they really couldn't even do that in the last 2 games. A lot of balls where they either pounded it right into the ground, or quite a few where they hit it so high up in the air with nothing on it that they were hitting like a lot of 88-mile-an-hour flyouts. I don't know if they were trying to elevate and that just was the result of it, but a rough showing from the offense in this kind of environment over those last 2 games, kind of contributing to the Brewers coming up short in this one.
Yeah, it was definitely a little disappointing. I do get why people were frustrated watching it. At the same time, they averaged 8.5 runs a game on the road trip. Like, they did take advantage of the environment they were in for the most part. And at times when you're that hot, you're just going to have a couple games where you just don't take good swings. You don't have a great approach and it doesn't work out super well. Definitely frustrating to watch when that's all it takes is a 96 mile per hour, 30-degree launch and you're hitting a homer to almost any part of the park. But it does happen. Just to correct you on the Contreras thing, only for one reason. Contreras pinch hit in the 8th, and that meant we got to see Andrew Vaughn play third base in the bottom of the 8th, which I was very excited about. Not because I think that's a real option, but because that's awesome. And he made the play. He made the one play. He got his one opportunity. He made it. It did not look comfortable at all, but it was made, and it was a successful out at first base on a 2-hopper. That was about as easy as it gets, but that was about the only exciting part of this game other than Sprout looking much better. And yeah, the worst part about not having StatCast is you also had a camera angle where you can't actually see, like, you can't even see the movement on the pitches well enough. So it did kind of take away a little bit of it for me, just in terms of, okay, what was working, what was actually like getting the job done for him. But a big part of it was throwing a bunch of strikes, getting the ball on the ground, and working through traffic rather than, just kind of letting it compound and grow and build into a big inning. So a good step in the right direction. I know some people were upset that he got pulled when he did. In my eyes, that is, you're pitching in that park. You're going through the middle of the order again. It was the 4, 5, 6 hitters coming up for the A's. Let him have his good moment. Like, he had a good start. Let's let him end on that and build on that the next time out. I've got no problem with it. If I were going to nitpick anything, Chad Patrick for the third time in 4 days when he's still somewhat new to relieving probably might be pushing things a little bit. But even still, he looked very good in that 15-14 game when he finished the game out in extra innings. And I think more than anything, he just had a rough game and probably a little bit tied to the park. So I think they handled it fine with Sproat is my main point. I think that was probably the right time to get him out and just let him build upon this outing and feel good about how it went.
Interesting week all around. Like I said, maybe some frustrations watching those last couple Vegas games, but to go through those two environments and to go 4-2 on the road trip, you're coming out of that in very, very good shape. So the Brewers doing more than enough to keep their head above water during a little bit of a tough stretch there in the schedule. Last thing that I wanted to talk about before we got into a couple of questions here. So StatCast unveiled their latest bat tracking metrics. So for a while, we've talked about kind of using some of that data to track or infer where a guy's timing is at. They've had like attack angle and that kind of stuff where you can see where the bat is angled when it makes contact with the ball. And using that, you can kind of infer, okay, was the bat still coming down on the ball? That means he was probably late when he swung. Was the bat coming up a little bit? Maybe he was early, or maybe he was, right on time where the bat is starting to come back up and he's catching it in a good spot. We can actually see that stuff more directly now because StatCast has numbers actually showing you like where the bat hit the ball, showing you whether a guy got jammed, whether a guy was over the top of the ball, whether he was underneath it, whether he was early on it, whether he was late on it, all that kind of stuff. So you can track like where the bat was up and down, where it was left and right when it hit the ball or swung through, where it was in space, like moving forward or backward as the pitch is coming in. So you can see all of this stuff now. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it and a lot of the inferring out of it. You can actually see that stuff directly. So there were a couple more things I wanted to talk about with it, but in the interest of time here, I just want to bring it down to one because I think we needed to talk about this anyway. And then Matt Trueblood was thinking the same thing because he wrote a nice story on it, talking about it in a little more detail. Trueblood's got his finger on the pulse. He's got a sixth sense for this kind of stuff. But it's about Christian Yelich. So Christian Yelich, if you look at his numbers so far and you look at his production, nothing looks out of the ordinary whatsoever. It looks like a pretty normal Christian Yelich season at this stage in his career. He's got 4 homers. He's hitting 280. He's got a 360 on base. He has a 121 WRC plus. All looks pretty normal, right? From a process standpoint, it does not look great right now. And it's especially a little bit concerning, or at least worth circling right now for a guy who has had his fair share of back issues, who had the soft tissue injury that he came back from pretty quickly. He's 34 years old. Looking at Christian Yelich's underlying numbers, his expected weighted on base average is only 294. That'd be the worst of his career. His hard hit rate would be the lowest of his career at 38%. His barrel rate is down. His everything is down, basically. He's whiffing more than he's whiffed since that 2020 season. He's striking out quite a bit. The walks have gone down a little bit. His deserved runs created plus, which is like WRC plus, but that's Baseball Prospectus's version where they kind of tell you what a hitter deserved to have his outcomes be based on, the kind of pitching he faced, the process of his at-bats. It weighs plate discipline very, very heavily. That's got him at 88 instead of 121. So that's a very big difference. And you're talking multiple process-based numbers that are saying based on how much contact he's making, the kind of contact he's making or not making, he has process-wise performed like a below-average hitter. And I think you can see it in the at-bats too. If you've just watched him hit, there are pitches that he's just, quite frankly, not looking good on at all. And one of those pitches is that breaking ball that's toward his back foot from a right-handed pitcher. And if that's a pitch that's executed, that's a very tough pitch to hit. I'm not saying there's a lot of guys who are going to hit that, but it has gotten worse for him this year against breaking balls. And I don't want to just read off Matt's entire story because I want people to go check it out. But this season against breaking balls, and Yelich has had struggles against breaking balls before, but this year he's hitting a $160 against them. He's got an almost 50% whiff rate against them. He's not hitting them hard at all when he does put them in play. He's got like an 83 mile an hour exit velo on these breaking balls. And Matt kind of dove into a lot of these new timing metrics to explain what's going on. And basically, the Cliff Notes version is it seems like there's a little bit of guessing going on, which isn't surprising. Again, he's getting older and he's slowing down a little bit. So his sprint speed is down a full foot per second this year. It's gone from 28 to 27. His bat speed has gone down about a full mile per hour as well, or close to a full mile per hour. So he's not swinging the bat as hard. He's just not moving as quick. And basically the takeaway here is because he's a little stiffer now and because he's not as mobile, even when he's on time for that breaking ball or he's guessing right, he's still swinging right over the top of it a concerning amount of the time, which again does speak to more of a mobility issue that he's just not able to get down there and he's not able to adjust the bat path a little bit to get to that pitch, even if everything else is on time. So we've always known timing's a big thing for him. It's a big thing for any hitter, but I think you had already kind of seen it the last couple of years. Just he's had more ebbs and flows than he used to, where when the timing is not there, it does look very, very bad for stretches of time. But when the timing is there, it still looks amazing. And he looks like one of the best hitters on the planet when it is there. But now if there's a new layer to this where it's not just timing, it's also like his actual mobility and he's slowing down a little bit as he gets into his mid 30s. And that's preventing him from getting to certain pitches. And it's now looking like there is a pretty big hole down there where guys can just attack him with spin and he's going to have a hard time getting to it, even if he knows it's coming. At the very least, it means that there's some things that he needs to work on and maybe he needs to reinvent himself a little bit and find something that's going to help with this. But I know the results look normal right now. There's some stuff going on under the hood that we need to watch because either it's going to get a lot worse, the results are going to get a lot worse, or he's going to figure something out here and it's going to be a different version of Christian Yelich, and that's how he's going to continue producing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's the opposite of the last couple of years where he had the slow starts and you would look under the hood and be like, a lot of it looks fine. Like he's probably going to be okay. Like the swing and miss was high to start last year, but I remember we dug into it and a lot of it was like, well, he's just whiffing against lefties, like righties he's been totally fine against. This year it's a different story, and like you said, it's kind of a grooved swing is essentially what it's coming down to right now, because I just don't think he has the mobility and the ability to make those mid-swing adjustments that he's used to. And if we're being honest, like Christian Yelich has never had a very good looking swing or just the entirety of the motion in his swing has never looked comfortable. It's never looked like something that you'd really want to teach somebody or repeat. It was just Christian Yelich does this, and it's worked very well for him over the course of his career. He might be hitting the age where he has to find a different way to get it done, like you said. And we saw him do it to an extent when he went to the toe tap. That was a form of changing how he's done things over the course of his career. I think he is smart enough to eventually make some changes and make it work. Might look different. It might be a different type of profile. I think the issue is you probably won't see him make those changes until the results do go down in a big way, because let's be honest, the hitter is going to have a really hard time buying into even a smart one, even one like Yelich, who's fully aware probably of what's going on. It's hard to buy into, I need to make changes right now while I'm 21% better than league average offensively, and I am getting the job done, and I've come up clutch a bunch of times this year, and those types of things. Like it's hard as a player to want to make that adjustment until the game kind of tells you need to. So it wouldn't shock me if it takes a kind of a bad stretch before we see Yelich actually make any noticeable changes. It's kind of like Woodruff for me, where I think he's smart enough and willing enough that he probably will make those changes, at least to make himself a serviceable, fine hitter. Again, when that contract was signed, I think the Brewers were probably expecting that to be the case by the end of it, that you're hoping for solid, okay production, nothing special. A lot like Ryan Braun when he signed his deal. I think that's where we're trending at this point, where I think he'll always find a way to be a fine big league hitter, whether it's drawing more walks or doing something differently to be an okay, solid producer. But this does, to me, kind of point to we're probably not going to see the highest level that we saw even like before the back injury going into the All-Star game. You know, he was an All-Star 2 years ago. He was very good last year in a lot of ways. I don't think we're going to see that very regularly, even if he does make these adjustments, because to me, this looks like somebody who's just aging out of that. It's not something he can control. It's just injury and age combining into, you're probably not getting that peak level of production, not even 2018 peak, but just the good version we've seen the last couple of years. My guess is it's probably gone. And as somebody who has pretty staunchly gone the other direction when people have been saying that the last couple of years, I think this is the time where I'm starting to buy it. Like, I do think this is kind of a real decline. Like, we're going to see a legitimate decline from Yelich now. And again, the Brewers knew that when they signed the deal, this was a very real possibility. I don't think he's going to be a complete waste of a spot in the lineup at any point. But I don't think you're going to ever, at the next couple of years, be viewing him as like, yep, that's one of our biggest threats in the lineup. I have a hard time seeing that moving forward. And that's okay, but I think that's where we're at.
Like I said before, it's not that we haven't seen ebbs and flows before and we haven't seen struggles, but we've never seen this version of it where it's, oh, he's slowing down a little bit. The bat speed's slowing down. He's not only not making contact, he's also not hitting the ball very hard, because that's always been his thing. Like, that has been a constant throughout his entire career, that even if he's mostly healthy, when he puts the ball in play, even if it's on the ground too much, like, he's always hitting the baseball very hard.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time that he's not even doing that anymore. So something is clearly changing here. And this is something that hasn't happened before. So now it's a matter of, it looks like he's declining. And now it's, how do you deal with that? Because you see plenty of players have successful second acts where they're able to reinvent themselves a little bit. He might be nearing that point here. It looks like,
yep,
just the physical ability from age, and again, nothing he can control. His body's not what it used to be, and now he's got to adapt to it.
Yep, exactly.
Well, I guess we'll technically jump into the minor league sandbox, because really these next couple questions are mostly about minor leaguers here. We'll start with Mason, who asked about what the team could look like for the Brewers in a couple of years. He said last week you guys mentioned Andrew Vaughn and William Contreras as guys that could be out in 27, coupled with third base and shortstop likely being rookies or unproven players, and questions in the outfield. So basically he said he's got concerns with how much of this team could end up being young players and unproven rookies next year, even though they have guys pretty well stocked throughout the system. Basically just said, like, we've seen this before with first half Churio, Bryce Terang as a rookie, Joey Weimer, Sal Frelick, where they're not always great right out of the gates. So I think his larger point is maybe he wants to have those concerns mitigated a little bit or talked off the ledge a little bit. I always come back to, this is why they keep everybody, because you don't know which ones are going to work. But if you have enough of them, it's probably not going to take too long for you to land on the permutation that is going to produce and is going to get something happening for you. And I would guess that's kind of what their plan is moving forward, where they don't necessarily, obviously they're high on Pratt and they're high on Lara. Like, those guys are going to be in the mix because they signed them to extensions. But everybody else, if you're like 2-3 deep on the depth chart for that position in the farm, and they're all kind of around the same timeline, you can cycle through those guys based on who looks the most ready, and just kind of take a little more of that sink or swim approach. And maybe they kind of do what they did this year at third base, where I know the Luis Rengifo signing has not worked out, but you do sign one of those types and say, hey, you're going to start here for now. That way, if these guys don't take well, we have a guy who can at least do what they would be doing in the big leagues, and we're not hurting their development because we can keep them in Nashville to work on these things, as opposed to we have absolutely no other options. That is part of the deal with Luis Rengifo. He's been a bad player this year, and if those young guys are ready to take over, they should think about making that move. But there is something to, Luis Rengifo has a 530 OPS in the big leagues versus Cooper Pratt has a 530 OPS in the big leagues. And now you wonder, like, what is this doing for his confidence and his development and all this kind of stuff? It does not hurt Luis Rengifo's development to have a 530 OPS in the big leagues. It might for one of these younger guys, and now you can kind of manage that a little better. So I think it's going to be a combination of they like having this many guys. This is why they keep all these guys, because if you keep 10 guys and you can expect to hit on 3 of them, you're going to be in a better spot. Like, you're going to have those 3 hit versus you got rid of half of these guys in trades or whatnot, and now you have to be right on which 3 are going to hit, as opposed to having all of them, and whichever ones pan out are the ones who pan out. And then maybe you do add like a low-cost veteran to just kind of maybe not necessarily increase the floor a ton, but to at least ensure that these guys are going to be in the best position for their development.
Yeah, I don't have much to add from that. It's like you said, it's stuff we've talked about before, and I agree. I think that's a big part of the equation. The only thing I will say is I'd be pretty surprised if, like we talked about, Vaughn and Contreras both potentially being out. I'd be a little surprised if both are gone, and I'd be shocked if those 2 and Bowers are gone next year. So I don't think you're going to end up relying completely on rookies on the infield. I think it was more in the context of, like, I could see either of them. I could see them trading Contreras. I could see them moving on from Vaughn as well. I could see them moving on from Bowers in free agency, but I don't think all 3 of them, and I'd honestly be kind of surprised if even 2 of them are gone. I think there's a decent chance they keep Contreras. I think they should at least explore what they might be able to get in a trade if there's a huge deal out there, which I think there could be. But I kind of feel like they're going to end up keeping Contreras at this point. That's just the way I've been reading it lately. So I don't think it's actually something you're going to need to worry about. And as Jack talked about, they will add some vets. And frankly, with that much money going out, if all 3 of those guys are gone, they could probably do a little bit better than the Luis Rengifos of the world in free agency too. Like, I think they might be able to make not a huge splash, never expect like a huge multi-year deal for anybody, but maybe shopping in, like, not the $1 bargain bin, but maybe the $5 bargain bin at a shop. Like, I think that's kind of how I would look at it. I don't think it would be necessarily the same level of type of player they'd be going after, but I get the concern. I think that would be a fair concern if they do end up with that many young players, because by the time you do cycle through all of them, you could end up having put yourself in too big of a hole to climb out of. I think that would be the concern. Like, I think they'd eventually find the right mix and that they'd probably be in a good spot by the season's end. But the question would be, would it happen in time? And I don't know, but I think you'd feel a lot safer if you at least have a couple guys who you have a lot more certainty in terms of the production.
Ron asks, what are you looking for to determine when you're ready to see Lara, Jet Williams, and Cooper Pratt? What are you looking to see to say that they're ready?
Yeah, to be honest, like, I think Luis Lara could play in the big leagues and hold his own and be just fine right now. The question is, would he play enough to actually be able to kind of, I mean, would it be worth it having him on the big league roster to be the 4th outfielder right now? And I would say no. I think there's a way you can make it work for Lara soon, and that is to start him against all lefties for Sal Frelick, who has been terrible against lefties, and then to just split some time with Mitchell and Frelick against righties as well. I think you could get him very regular playing time by doing that. Not much different than what Frelick and Mitchell are getting right now. I think you could kind of split those 3 up pretty easily by doing it that way. But I think they want to see Brandon Lockridge back. I think they like Brandon Lockridge, and when he's healthy, they're probably going to bring him back and put him in that fourth outfield role and start him against lefties. And I think they'd probably prefer to just wait until there's a very clear opening for Lara to play regularly. Pratt and Jet are tougher. Pratt looks more ready now, which is funny because I think 3 or 4 weeks ago I was saying the opposite, that it was Jet. Jet's really fallen off since that strong beginning of May, like first 3 weeks of May. It hasn't been very good since then. He homered yesterday, which was good to see, but it has not been great since that stretch. Pratt hasn't kept up the extremely hot stretch that he was going on, but it's been a lot more solid since then than what Williams has shown. Pratt's kind of sustaining the production and a lot of the process stuff a little bit better than Williams, who's been more up and down. Pratt's the shortstop, playing very good defense. I don't know what I necessarily need to see from him. I guess I'll just say I'm still thinking before the All-Star break we see him or Jet. One of those two will be up by then, and I think Lara will too. So I think you see one of the infielders and Lara by the All-Star break. That would be my timeline for the two, unless things go off the rails and they're just not performing or showing good process like they have been for a little while now. But that's the timeline I'm looking at. I don't know that there's a ton for them to prove, but I think the Brewers want to either see them force their way in or something happens that necessitates them coming up. I do know everyone's been pointing. Ken Rosenthal kind of got people pointing towards the 16th because that's when they could trade the Luis Rengifos of the world without his permission. And I, again, will say I don't really know who's going to trade for Luis Rengifo, but if someone does, that would be wonderful. So if anyone's out there looking for Luis Rengifo, Matt Arnold should be happy to make that move. And at that point, I think one of them does come up if that happens for some inexplicable reason.
Switching to a pitching question before I really let you loose here. Jonathan asks, it would appear that Tyson Harden had another very good outing in AAA. Do you think he could be a legitimate option for the Brewers sooner rather than later? And how does his stuff look in AAA?
Jack, I want you to give your thoughts first on this one, because I know that this is one you actually we've talked about a little bit, and you talked to me about the stuff. So I want you to talk about the stuff first.
I like the stuff a lot. I think he's got two pretty good fastballs. I think he's got kind of a good mix of what he can do. I like his changeup. He gives you kind of some weird looks with good velo and weird angles, and he can do a couple different things. I just hope that when he gets up here, which I think he's good enough that he can help them this year if there's the need for it. I think that's just the question. Is there going to be the need for it because he's not on the 40 and all this kind of stuff? And just based on that, there's going to be a lot of guys ahead of him on the depth chart. I would just like to, when he gets up here, see him keep using his stuff the same way that he's using it in Nashville, because he throws a couple pitches that the Brewers generally don't throw a ton up here. He's got that very flat four-seam fastball, that upshoot four-seam that has a lot more backspin carry than you would think from his slot. He can get a lot of swing and miss up in the strike zone. He's got a decent two-seamer that he can throw as well, and that tends to be what they have guys lean on a lot more. He's also got the sweeper. They don't love big breaking balls for starting pitchers. He's also got a nice depthy changeup. They don't love that for starters either if he can't execute it. So I think it's a very well-rounded arsenal. I think there's a lot of things he can do. It doesn't mean he doesn't have things to clean up, like there's always command and sequencing and all that kind of stuff. But I think he brings a lot of unique things to the table, and I just don't want to see them put him into a box of what has worked for other guys. To some extent, it is kind of the Gasser thing, where it's like they didn't have Gasser really throwing a lot of those flat four-seam fastballs. And I get it. Like, those are pitches that generally have to be up in the zone for them to play. The moment you start leaving that pitch down, it's probably going to get hit a little more. But I just don't want to see him come up here and he's throwing like 60% sinkers now, or even the Crow thing, where it's been like Crow pitched out of the bullpen in Vegas and they still had him throwing 81% fastballs out of the pen. Like, with a lot of guys, they are pretty good at letting them take the lead on, hey, what are you good at? What can you do? Let's do things in the way that works for you instead of being cookie cutter. But it seems to me like when guys have the capability to do multiple things, they tend to favor some of those things more than others. And that's where I start to wonder if, like, hey, maybe are we necessarily getting into the highest ceiling version of this guy? Because I think he can do a little bit more than what you're letting him do right now. And Harden just feels to me like he checks a lot of those boxes of he can do a lot of different things. He can get outs in different ways. So I don't want to see him come up here and as a pitching nerd, see them unnecessarily shrink his arsenal is the one thing that I'm a little bit afraid of. And I get why they do it for some guys. Like for some guys, it's, hey, you can do this down the line, but this is what we think is going to work best for now. I just don't want to see him get up here. And if he can do some of these things, have them kind of limit the way that he's pitching.
Yep, I would agree with all of that. I think, first of all, the fact that they use it the way they do in AAA, again, just I watch Jefferson Cairo call games, and I just really enjoy how he calls games. And I hope when he gets to the big leagues, they allow him to call the game how he does in AAA right now. But I agree with all of that. I think this is a legitimate 5-pitch mix. He can use all of them in different ways to get different hitters out, and that is a very valuable thing to have at your disposal. And I think he should continue to do it that way. I mean, the 4-seam, again, you look at the pure induced vertical break, nothing stands out, but the arm angle he throws it from, ends up being about a negative 3.7 degree vertical approach angle, which is elite. It's a very, very abnormal vertical approach angle. So he has that going for him. He's got the cutter. The contact in AAA has been very, very good for in his direction. Like it's been soft contact, a lot of soft contact. The expected stats have not been good for hitters. It's just all looked really good. The walks have been in a solid place. I mean, this most recent outing was referenced in the question is 6 innings, 11 strikeouts, no walks. He is showing that he can get lefties and righties out, which is a little bit of a concern last year. I think the changeup is a huge part of why he's been able to kind of reverse that. And I know that, I think some of the reasons we don't see the changeups for some guys is that there's a concern about commanding it. We've seen it with Kyle Harrison. Like he leaves that thing up a lot. In all the starts I've watched, that has not been an issue for Harden. Like it hasn't been something he's really struggled with. He's made mistakes with. If he does miss, it seems like he misses down, and it's probably a little bit of a waste pitch, but I can live with that. I think in most cases, that's what you'd prefer for a changeup. If you're going to miss out of the zone further, don't miss in the zone, because that becomes pretty hittable unless it's the Craig Yoho, Devin Williams, those types of changeups, which this is not. But yeah, I love the mix. I've been very high on Harden. I felt really good about watching him in Double-A while he was still posting like a 7 ERA this year. Like I thought the stuff had taken a step. I thought he was better than he was last year, even though the results were way worse to start the year. It's been very nice to see him go to AAA and have this type of performance, because this is the type of pitcher he is. And I'm not saying he's 1.5 ERA or whatever it is right now moving forward, and that's not translating to MLB directly, but I do think he can help the Brewers. I think he could help them relatively soon, especially if he ended up in a bullpen role. I could see him going the Woodruff Burns route that they haven't done a ton of late. We always talk about it, but they haven't done it a lot with their starters. I could see him being that type of guy, because I think the velo will play up more in the pen. We saw him in college touching 99 out of the bullpen. He's been a reliever as of only 2 years ago, so I think he could transition into that role pretty quickly. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if that ends up being how we see him this year, but I think he's a starter for the Brewers as early as next year, or at least getting some starts, because I think this is a legitimate big league starter.
That's going to do it for the joint section of the minor league sandbox. I'll let you run with your personal notes.
Fantastic. All right. We've got some DSL stuff to talk about. I'm not going to go super in depth on all these guys because it's been about a week, 10 days or so, but some guys are off to pretty good starts, and some of the names are bigger names, and some of them are some under the radar types that I think we definitely need to know about. Diego Frontado, my favorite guy in this class. So far in this season, he's got 39 plate appearances. He's already hit 2 homers. He's got 8 walks to 5 strikeouts. 5 for 6 on stolen bases. It's a 1039 OPS. I watched him play a couple games on YouTube, which, maybe I shouldn't admit, but I've done it. He is advanced. He is really advanced for that level. It just looks different than a lot of the other guys out there. It's a good glove. The arm might not be shortstop level, so maybe he doesn't end up sticking there, but everything else about his profile is just, in the context of the DSL and international signings at his age, it's one of the higher floors I've seen because there's just a lot of good there. And I think the ceiling has some interesting potential too, because he's already hitting the ball hard. He's hitting for some power. I'm a big fan of Frontado. Leander Matos is one that kind of popped up late in the process as an interesting guy. He's had a great start to the season. In his first 27 plate appearances, he also has 2 homers. He has a double. He has a triple. 5 walks to only 4 strikeouts. He's 5 for 5 on steals, mostly playing third base so far. Has played a little first, has played some second. 16 for another month, and he is built pretty well. It makes me wonder if there's a ton of physical development left. He might be kind of maxed out, but he has a 1243 OPS so far, and like I said, more walks than strikeouts. Getting some attention from some national accounts in terms of the types of batted balls he's put up so far, which I don't have access to, but it's exciting that people are taking notice of it. That's another one to watch. Sebastian Fernandez, I believe it's pronounced. He has a 1270 OPS through his first 30 or so plate appearances. He has 2 homers, 2 doubles, 9 strikeouts. So his strikeouts are a little bit higher than the other guys, but 7 walks as well. He's a catcher, and he's also thrown out 8 of 17 attempted base stealers, including 6 in one game, which I don't think I've ever seen someone throw out 6 runners in one game. So that was really impressive. Left-handed swing. He's a guy I found like a couple years ago on Instagram, and he was a really choppy swing. Seeing the swings lately, really like the way he's gone with it. I think there's a much better plane. Definitely one to watch. A little bit older for the class than like Matos is, but definitely a guy to keep an eye on as a catcher who's throwing the ball well and hitting like this early. Osiris Ramirez, he has 3 homers already, 7 strikeouts, 4 walks, and 27 plate appearances. So again, a little more strikeout than some of the other guys. But it's a 1172 OPS. He was a guy that kind of got some sleeper attention from some people as a pretty powerful bat, and clearly that is showing up so far. He's been playing a clean infield slate. He's played some short, played some second, mostly a third baseman himself. As we go through this, you will understand why the Brewers have multiple DSL teams, because a lot of these guys overlap and they have to be on separate teams so that they can all get their playing time. And Henny Fernandez, he was one of I think he had the 4th highest bonus, maybe the 5th highest in the class. He has a 1004 OPS so far. He has a homer, a double, 4 strikeouts, 3 walks. He's 2 for 5 on stolen bases. He's supposed to have plus speed, must not be getting the greatest jumps so far, but he was an infielder when he signed. He's mostly playing outfield now. He's played 1 game at second, but mostly in center. Really good athlete with more pop than you would think with the frame, so he's one to watch. Ricky Monies has been off to a pretty slow start, but he did hit a grand slam today, so something to monitor moving forward. Maybe my favorite so far, other than Frontado, which is interesting because the offensive numbers aren't great. But Moises Salazar, I watched the first game of the season. He was catching against the Orioles DSL team. I'm telling you, this is the best defense I've seen from a 16-year-old catcher, like with my eyes, ever. The receiving, he had like a hold of the game. He was calming pitchers down. He was just in charge out there. The receiving was great. I had a 1.8 pop time on his 1 throw to second base. He's thrown out 3 base runners already. The offense is off to a slow start. He's still 16 years old, I believe, for the whole season. He already has a homer. He's a switch hitter. He's supposed to be better from the right side, but had a homer from the left side. I saw a spring training homer he had at 103 from the left side as a 16-year-old. He just looked the part to me. Gave me some Jefferson Cairo type vibes, but probably better on the actual defensive stuff than Cairo was at that age. So it's a plus arm. Baseball America even wrote it up as a plus arm, and he just looked very, very advanced behind the plate and a good defensive catcher is going to carry you a long way. A 16-year-old switch hitter with pop from both sides to go along with it. He's really, really interesting to me. I'm kind of expecting the numbers to look a lot better than they have so far once we get further into the season. A couple ACL standouts, some guys on the complex in Arizona. Juan Martinez, he has a 1273 OPS this month. He has 2 homers, 2 doubles, 3 walks, 2 strikeouts, 5 for 7 on stolen bases. Martinez on the season has an 8% strikeout rate and a 12.4% walk rate. It's a 140 WRC plus. The exit velos are up to at least 108 this year, which is good to see. Seeing some pop from him. He's 5'11", 170. He only turned 19 a couple months ago. Really interesting guy. Plays mostly second base defensively. Plays some third. Sounds like the arm probably could handle third, but it's more suited for second base. But it's supposedly pretty good actions. I haven't had a chance to watch him, but I'm hoping he gets a jump to Wilson soon. Speaking of guys who should probably be in Wilson, Alexander Frias, another really hot week for him. He had a walk-off homer on a pitch that nearly hit him in the knee. He still hit it 102 out to right for a walk-off bomb. He has a 1033 OPS this month, which actually lowers his season-long OPS. 175 WRC plus on the season. The walk rate has skyrocketed over the last few weeks, which is great to see because that was the one thing. Early on, there weren't many walks. He's now at almost a 16% walk rate and a strikeout rate under 19% still. So, again, talked about him a lot, but we've seen 117 exit velos as an 18-year-old. There could be a pretty special bat here, especially if he can elevate the ball more often. Andrew Fisher, also a great start to June here. He's got 4 homers in the month already, a 1485 OPS, 11 walks to 10 strikeouts, 10 strikeouts in 33 plate appearances. I'm not going to give the whole spiel again, but that's the thing. He's going to have to cut down the strikeouts and the whiffs. Josh Adamszewski also continues to just hit. That those two both need to be in Biloxi soon. Adamszewski has a 1425 OPS in June, 2 homers, 3 doubles, 5 strikeouts, 4 walks in 27 plate appearances. And then Luke Adams, since coming off the IL in AAA, he has 3 homers in his first 6 games back. Strikeouts are pretty high so far in the return, but on the season, including an 0-16 or 0 for 16 start to the season, he has a 129 WRC plus in AAA. I still think he needs to swing more often. He needs to be more aggressive at pitches that are over the heart of the plate, but it's a very, very interesting profile. Moving to the pitching side of things, I've got a few DSL arms here. So Derlene Garcia had one of the more impressive lines I've seen from a DSL pitcher at any point. 5 innings, 2 hits, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts, no earned runs. From the video I found, it's a low 90s fastball with some pretty nice carry on it from a relatively low slot. So seems like he plays a little bit of the Tyson Harding game with it. It's a big curveball in like the 75 to 76, 77 mile per hour range. He throws what's been labeled in the video as a cutter, more like a short slider in my eyes in the 84 mile per hour range, and then a rare changeup. I haven't seen the velo on it, but it had pretty nice depth to it the one time I saw it. So he's 19. He threw a strong 19 innings in the DSL last year too. They don't do too many stateside moves in season these days, but he feels like somebody who it wouldn't surprise me to see him come over to Arizona somewhat soon. Santiago Martinez, a lefty who only threw 3 innings in 2025 in his debut season, had some injuries he worked through. Looked talented, but walked 6, didn't strike anyone out in those 3 innings last year. First outing this year, 5 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, 7 strikeouts, no earned runs. Really good to see from him. He's got some low 90s stuff with some pretty big breaking stuff from the left side. Definitely a name to keep an eye on. He will be 17 for a couple more months still, so some room to grow for him. He's younger than Garcia is. Luis Aguayo, he threw 9 innings in the Mexican Winter League as a 16-year-old prior to signing with the Brewers, so facing legitimate pro-level players. There are MLB players who have played in that league. He needed Tommy John shortly after signing last winter, so we didn't see him last year. He'll be 18 until the end of November. He's only had 2 outings so far. He's gone 2 innings total, 2 hits, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts, an earned run. It's a low 90s fastball. He's got the sinker as well. 2 distinct breaking balls, and a changeup is his best pitch. Baseball America said probably a plus pitch already, and I haven't seen too much video of it, but it definitely looks like a good offering. Tyson Harden would have been next on this list, but we already talked about him in depth. Bishop Letson had a really strong start his last time out, which was great to see, kind of built upon a solid start the time before. This was arguably the best start of his career so far. So he went 6 shutout innings. That was a career high in innings. He threw 89 pitches, also a career high. Letson struck out 8, only walked 1, and only allowed 3 hits. He also was still touching 96 on the fastball on pitch number 82 in this outing. So I watched this whole outing. This looked like the guy that I know he's capable of being. He finished May with a strong start, but he walked 4 in that outing. Everything else looked good, but the walks were still too high. Seeing only 1 in this one, seeing the strikeouts, seeing him go deep, seeing him hold the velo, I get the feeling things are turning around for him, and that's good because the talent level there is as high as anybody in the system. The last 2 guys I'll talk about here are 2 guys who got promoted to high A this week. I don't believe either of them have pitched. I know one of them hasn't. I don't believe the other has pitched unless the T-Rats somehow got their game in today, despite the weather, which I don't think they did. Peyton Nix, which is not spelled N-I-X. It's N-I-K-S-C-H, but it is pronounced that way. At least to my understanding, that's how every announcer has been pronouncing it. He got promoted to high A from low A. He was an undrafted guy out of Ginger Polson's territory, a JUCO guy who was committed to Purdue at the time, sitting in like the upper 80s with 3 distinct fastballs, changeup that he could get down to below negative or get into the negatives in induced vertical break, spins the ball really well with 2 different breaking balls, big pitch mix, really good spin, good feel for manipulating the ball, and the velo's been up in pro ball. He's the couple games we've had the radar on him for when he's gone out there, he was sitting more 92, getting up a little bit higher. The stuff will play at that velo. So I'm very interested to see when he pitches in Appleton, it'll all be on radar, at least in the home games, because they always show it on the screen. So I'll be curious to see if that's really where he's sitting regularly, but I think he's really interesting. He's been out of the pen. I think he's got the pitch mix to start if they wanted him to, but for now, looks like he's going to be a reliever. An interesting one. And as we've talked about a number of times, Ginger Polson's pretty good at finding those under the radar types. And yeah, this one comes from her territory again. So the other one that was promoted was Jaden Dubanowitz. I talked about him a lot so far. I'm not going to go super in depth on him, but the numbers in low A were quite good. 2.25 ERA, strikeout rate of 30.9%, whiff rate overall of 36.5%. Velo's been up to 98 this year. He looks good. He's pitching Saturday, or he's scheduled to start Saturday for the first time for the T-Rats. Definitely hoping to check in on that one. I believe he was mostly in low A as like an extended rehab this year. I think they wanted to start him in high A, but he was injured to begin the year, went to the ACL. I think he would have always been in high A, but they went to low A to kind of continue building him up at a little bit of a lower level. This is where he's meant to be. This is where he's going to get challenged the most. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing it because the stuff looks like it's really taken a step. And if he can maintain the command that he showed last year with it, he's going to fly up lists into like top 15 guy in the system, I would say. Like he has that type of potential. So out of nowhere, if the velo holds and the walks get back and under control a little bit, like one of the most interesting arms in the system. So very curious to see how he goes or how he looks in high A. But yeah, that's all I got. This was one of our long ones again, Jack. We're back on pace.
Oh, we had to do it for episode 100,
That's
right?
true. That's true.
Extra content for episode 100.
You got it.
I'm going to round this out the same way that we started it, with a round of applause for episode 100 and for Spencer's original reporting.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Spencer, for your service to minor league enthusiasts everywhere. I'm sure you'll have more great scoops for us next week for episode.
Yeah, totally.
some pressure on you now.
Yeah. Well, if anyone has anything that you'd like to share with me now that Jack has put the pressure on, feel free. DMs are open.
The first time is fun. After that, it's not as fun because now there's an expectation you keep raising the bar too high. But we'll see if Spencer can top his exploits from this week here. On the next edition of the Brewer Fanatic Podcast, we will talk to you all again next Friday. Thank you all for sticking around for 100 episodes if you've made it this long, or if you've just joined us, thank you for just joining us and hopping on the bandwagon. We hope you'll come back next week.